Hello there, Dastardly here, and at the request of some of my viewers, I have decided to make a special breakdown video where I show you the techniques, details and tricks used to create the blood-sucking gore effects in my previous SFM animation. Now just a quick heads up before we go in, I just wanted to clarify that this is a behind the scenes video and it's not meant to be a tutorial in the traditional sense. But if you're looking to experiment with your own blood effects, then feel free to use this video as a reference. In the case that you do, you might need to pause this video at some points to understand what is happening. Let's get started, shall we? On today's video, we'll be looking at Double Edge Defense, my own personal entry for Best Action in the 2016 Saxy Awards. One of my goals when creating this animation was to show the audience the kind of damage that our mercenaries would endure in a combat zone. And holy hell was this video quite the ambition. Our first effect we will analyze is this red engineer racking the blue spy with his wrench. First impressions are always important, am I right? This effect was a combination of 6 different particle systems working together. In fact, every death in this movie is basically multiple particle systems at work. The first particle system was a TF2 particle named Blood Impact Red 01 Droplets. After shifting the particle into position, I then readjusted the particle in the particle system editor by changing some options like lifetime, radius, trail length, speed from position, and color. I also changed the amount of drops which would spawn in Emit instantaneously. The next particle system was a little trickier. It was actually a Left 4 Dead 2 particle system from the Left 4 Dead 2 content pack downloadable for Source Filmmaker. In this case, I transferred the particle system definition file from the Left 4 Dead 2 file to the TF file just to make things easier and more convenient. As for the particle system itself, I loaded this particle named Blood Impact Red 01 Goop. Then I moved it into position and readjusted the properties in the particle system editor, such as color, position within sphere, radius, basic movement, and lifetime. The camera angle was actually rather concerning for me, considering the particles are really 2D sprites, so while the effect may look good from this angle, not so much from this angle. The third particle system, which is this red smoke effect as you see here, was another Team Fortress 2 particle system called Environment Sawblood, and was of course changed for the particle system editor to fit the scene, such as color and size as well as positioning. The fourth particle was a decal created using a particle system from this workshop add-on here. You can find this add-on on the workshop by following the link in the description. The decal particle files can be found in this folder here. The fifth particle system used was another TF2 particle named Blood Spray Red 01. In the particle system editor, I changed the renderer to render sprite trail, replaced the material with blood drops, and then added a new property in initializer called Trail Length Random, so I can create the drops of blood. In hindsight, however, I really should have just used the Blood Droplets particle system since I was pretty much going for the same effect here. Once I was done with the editor, I then placed the particle into position and then attached it to the spy's head so that it would spray out of the spy's mouth as he fell. As for the sixth and final particle system, which is the drops of blood that hit the floor, I loaded a decal into the scene, and in the editor, I replaced the material with the bleed out particle from Left 4 Dead 2. For the emitter, I used emit continuously, then adjusted the duration and rendered the decals that spawn, and then I added and modified properties such as radius, color, and positioning. Finally, as the decal spawned, I then animated the particle so that it would flow alongside the droplets as they hit the ground. The only downside for this trick is that it only works for one take, so when the next take rolls over, all the decals will reset back to their original position. The next effect to analyze is the spy spitting out his blood. The blood around the spy's mouth is a combination of 3 different custom textures which I have created using this program called Gibbed, and for the use of material overrides, I replaced the textures in the element viewer. This useful guide on Steam helped me out with this trick. The blood droplets particle system is used here again, and as for the red mist that appears here, I used an impact particle system called Impact Concrete Child Base, with the usual tweaks to the properties in the particle system editor. But the most interesting effect here is the puddle of blood that appears when the spy spits. It is another Left 4 Dead 2 particle effect called Blood Incapitated. In the particle editor, I changed the radius scale so that it would expand out quickly, but then gradually slow down at the end of its course, editing both the scale bars and the end time. Then I changed the color as usual, as well as the emitter and how many maximum decals can spawn. The blood droplets you see on the ground are a different particle system due to the problem with takes as I mentioned earlier. These droplets are a decal particle system which are loaded into the scene and adjusted in the particle editor so that it will represent the pattern created by the drops of blood. The next effect we will look over is this rather brutal headshot seen here. The bloody exit wound you see on the spy's head is rather a Gibbed model from Left 4 Dead 2 with a red tint applied to it. For starters, I loaded this specific Gibbed model into the scene, and then I activated override materials. Then in the element viewer, I looked at materials and added the color attribute in the menu named Master Wound. Then I applied a red tint in the color menu. To change the size of the Gibbed, I selected the bone which controls the model, and in utilities selected add scale control to models. Finally, I attached the Gibbed onto the spy's head and animated the scale of it appropriately. As for the particles themselves, the first effect was another use of the Gibbed particle system from Left 4 Dead 2. When it comes to creating the pattern seen here, the most important properties to edit were emit instantaneously and position within sphere random, as well as taking the camera into account. The second effect seen here is another appearance of the blood droplets particle system, and the red mist seen here is another use of TF2's environment saw blood particle system. The final effect shown here is another Left 4 Dead 2 particle system named Gore Blood Droplet Short. The thing about Left 4 Dead 2's bloody particle systems are that they are a lot more sophisticated than those used in Team Fortress 2, since there was a lot more going on in the particle editor. This means having to remove standard properties and then change everything else as usual, such as color, radius, alpha, lifetime, etc. Then, once I was done with the particle editor, I attached the particle system to the Gibbed model on the spy's head. And now onto this next scene. To show the entry wound of the bullet, I made another separate copy of my bloody texture so I can have blood around the spy's eye socket in GIMP. Then I used another Left 4 Dead 2 Gibbed and shrunk it to fit in place of the eyeball. The decal behind the spy's head uses another one of my own custom textures, as is the same deal with this decal located here. The pieces of bread on the floor are parts of a model used from Valve's own short film, Meet the Spy, mainly from this scene here. And the puddle of blood is another use of the blood incapitated particle system, with some edits made in the particle system editor and then animated accordingly. To create the bullet wounds, I loaded a decal particle system to place on the spy, while also making sure to sync it with the engineer's pistol. Then in the particle editor, I replaced the material with one of my own custom bullet wound textures. Then I rescaled the radius, turned off rotation, and then increased the initial particles so the decal would appear darker. Then I repeated this process until I had 4 bullet wounds on the spy. As for the small fountains of blood, or squibs, I loaded a Left 4 Dead 2 particle system called Blood Impact Smoker. And in the particle editor, I removed the chunk and droplet particle effects, as well as this property here called Velocity Set for Control Point. And in materials, I replaced the Spray 1 particle with the Water Splash particle from Half-Life 2. And then I did the usual tweaking to the various properties such as alpha, radius, color, and positioning. I also changed up the properties in the editor for the smoke effect as well. And as with the bullet wounds, I repeated this process until each wound had its own blood spray. Now this next kill featuring the red sniper is perhaps my own personal favourite due to how much effort went into it. I'm sure you can already tell by this menu here. To simulate the headshot, I used 2 Left 4 Dead Gibbed models. The first piece which flies off is the exploded boomer stake, and the second Gibbed to represent the exit wound. As for the particles, each particle system was edited considerably for the particle system editor. The first effect is the usual blood droplets particle system from TF2. The second effect, which is this pink mist, is another use of TF2's environment saw blood particle system. The third effect seen here is the Gore Blood Droplet Short particle system from Left 4 Dead 2, previously used on the Blue Spy. The blood and mist which erupts from the sniper's head was created using Left 4 Dead 2's Blood Impact Smoker particle system. And the small fountain of blood was again created using the Blood Droplets particle system. And now for the fun part. In all seriousness, the first step was to load a decal to place on the wall and replace the material with one of my own custom decals. Then once I added this property, movement lock to control point, I animated the decal so that it appeared to spread along the wall. As for the blood that leaks down the wall, I loaded another decal and then changed the material to the bleed out particle from Left 4 Dead 2. And then I changed the particle's radius and coloured it red. To make the blood streak effect, I added the emitter named Emit Continuously and set an appropriate emission rate, in this case 150. And finally, I animated the point of the particle to draw the red streak you see. And then I repeated this process until I had 4 streaks of blood leaking down the wall, each one animated differently. For this next take, I used override materials to replace the sniper's head with my own set of custom textures. And as for the bullet hole, I loaded a decal from this file here, and in the particle editor, replaced the material with a computer decal from Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And then I added this property, movement lock to control point, and attached the decal to the sniper's head so it will lock into place. In this next take, this decal uses a second copy of my previously used custom texture, only edited to show trails of blood leak down the wall, mainly for an aftermath feeling. And more brain gifs from the spy being used here, with the other part of the skull hidden behind the sniper. The next step to look over is the blue pyro who falls to a sentry gun. As you're about to see, quite a lot of work went into this one. For starters, I loaded a decal to place on the pyro and replaced the material with one of my custom bullet wound decals. And then I locked the decal into place with movement lock to control point. One of the problems with bullet wounds is that they only lock onto the character's bone and not their clothes, so to fix this, I had to animate the decals in the graph editor myself so that the wounds look more authentic. And then I created 8 more bullet wounds with this method, each one animated differently and using a different custom bullet wound. To create these bloody squibs, I reused the blood impact smoker particle system, and in the particle editor, removed chunk and droplets, as well as velocity set from control point. And then I changed the usual properties such as positioning, radius, colour, and number to emit. For the red mist, I changed the lifetime to around half a second so that the smoke effect would fade out quicker and without having to interfere with the rest of the shot. For the headshot, the first particle system was a computer decal from CSGO used to create the shattered eyepiece on the pyro. The next effect was an impact particle system named Impact Glass. In the editor, I removed the smoke and bits particles while leaving the glass effect intact. And as for the burst of smoke, I changed the colour in the particle editor so as to show this pinkish mist effect. The next effect was simply a Left 4 Dead 2 Gibbed particle system edited in a way so that it appeared to sprout from the bullet wound. For the blood spraying from the bullet hole, I used the blood droplet particle system from TF2, and to simulate the spray of blood drying out, I had to set this property called Operator End Fade Out to 1, which is the same value as emission duration. This basically creates the effect of the blood spray drying out. If both of these properties were set to 2, then the spray would take 2 seconds to dry out instead. To make this blood spray here, I used another impact particle system named Impact Concrete. And then I removed the smoke, sparks, and base effects, as well as also disabling the flakes of concrete. This burst of dirt had its colour changed to red to represent the spray of blood, as is the same deal with the second burst particle effect. For the decal on the wall, I used another custom texture of mine and added the radius scale property so that it would simulate an expanding effect as the decal spawned. Also, more leaking blood effects. One thing I did not account for, however, was the lighting in this scene, which explains why the colour looks somewhat off in the final version. And finally, some more use of the Beat the Spy brain gibs. Our next effect to analyse is the demoman's blood splashing onto the heavy. The first effect was a TF2 particle system named Blood Decap Fountain. In the particle editor, I replaced the Gibbed particle with the Spray 1 particle, and then I changed the emission duration and speed from positioning so that the blood would appear to spray completely over the heavy. The next particle system was another TF2 particle named TFC Sniper Mist, and was used to create this red cloud that follows the blood spray. To cover the heavy in blood, a total of 6 custom textures were created to replace the original textures through override materials. To time when to replace the textures, I had to create another take with which to replace with my custom made textures on the heavy and his items. And to explain the bloody squibs on the heavy when he gets shot, just the same technique I used on the pyro, the only major difference being the bullet wounds, which instead are more computer decals from CSGO. Also, as an added touch, I added some spark effects using the impact metal particle system to the heavy's belt when the bullets hit it. Our next kill is the blue medic from a shotgun to the chest. The first step to do was to load a group of 6 decals to place on the medic using my custom bullet wounds as the material source. The decals can be seen clipping here, but as seen from a distance, it's not really much of an issue. For the bloody squibs, I reused the blood impact smoker particle system, and then I removed chunk, droplets and smoke particle effects, and I replaced the spray 1 particle with the water splash particle. And then I adjusted the positioning, number of particles to emit, the color, and reduced the values in radius random. As for the pink mist, I reused the environment saw blood particle system from TF2 and adjusted both the color, radius and the other properties in the particle editor. Then to top it off, I reused the blood impact smoker particle system to show off the blood which sprays from the medic while tinkering with properties such as emit instantaneously and position within sphere random so that I had a suitable pattern for this rupturing effect. And this decal on the wall is simply another custom texture created by me. The next scene to look at is the soldier losing his footing. For the longest time, I have always wanted to try out a dismemberment animation in my videos, but how? Originally, I thought I could animate shrinking the soldier's foot and putting a bloody stump over the end, but that just created more problems. Then I remembered seeing this workshop add-on named Expanded Gibbed Characters and it all made sense. Firstly, I loaded the soldier model from the Expanded Gibbed Characters add-on from the workshop, and in the motion editor, pasted the movements from the hardware morph soldier onto the other soldier model so that both could line up in place. Then in the graph editor, I animated a swapping technique using a stepping process so that both soldier models would swap in place of each other in just one frame. Finally, I animated the Gibbed soldier model as appropriate while the hardware morph soldier model was hiding under the floor for the rest of the take. Also, the soldier's head is another separate model from the same workshop add-on. As for the blood itself, I reused the blood impact smoker particle system for the hacked off leg. For the blood decals on the ground, I loaded another decal particle system and in the editor used this water splash particle effect as the material and coloured it red. As for how I animated it, I added this emitter named emit continuously and then I set an appropriate emission rate and set the duration to 0.25 of a second. Finally, I added this property radius scale and set the values such as start and end scales, the end time, and the scale bias so that I could create this expanding effect. For the dismembered foot, I used the same stepping process as with the 2 soldier models, and I used the blood incapitated particle system to show the pull-up blood leaking from the stump. To explain this next shot, I reused the blood impact smoker particle system and tweaked properties such as position within sphere random so I can create this sort of erupting effect. And I animated some more Meet the Spy head jibs. Also, yes, that is Coach saying reload, give yourself a pat on the shoulder for pointing it out. Reload! And now onto what is perhaps my most difficult death, and seeing as this is my first attempt at a slow motion kill, I am hoping to do better in the future. So the first order of business was to animate the scout in a way that seemed to resemble a slow motion fall. Then I added some decals to place on the scout using the same computer decals from CSGO. Also, when I first rendered this scene, the decals would not show themselves due to what I believe was a bug with the emitter, so I had to change the emitter to emit continuously and then edit the duration and rate of emission for the particles while also disabling rotation and setting both radius values to 1.5, and that's what fixed the bug. As for the squibs, I had to change the timescale for my particle systems to 1/4 of a second and then edit the positioning of the particle effects to compensate for the scale reduction. For this next shot, I replaced the squibs with a single blood impact smoker particle system since the scout's blood was already flying. Then I had the scout get shot just once more using another decal and a blood impact smoker particle system for the squib. This engineer getting hit by a stray bullet was done using the same process as I make my squibs. And in this scene, I also replaced the engineer's face with another custom texture to show a bruise on his left cheek. As is the same deal with the blue sniper having a nosebleed in this shot here. And now we save the best for last, the blue sniper's head exploding in a delightful mess of red. I can pretty much say that the deaths of both the red and blue sniper are my personal favourites just because of how much fun I have with these characters. The first thing to do was load the expanded Gibbed model for the sniper and then do the same model swapping trick as done with the soldier. And then I loaded the stun animation to use on the sniper. Next, I added another headhunter's wrap to the Gibbed sniper and replaced the texture with another one of my own custom textures. Now, I had to load the spy's head jibs and assemble them into place. This eye, however, was from the downloadable Black Mesa content pack. After the animating was done, I loaded the blood impact smoker particle system and edited the properties in the particle editor. For the fountain of blood, I used the blood impact droplets particle system from TF2. To make it so that the blood fountain dries out, I set both the emission duration and the end fade out to 2. And the decal on the wall was another one of my custom textures. In this next shot, I used the decal particle system to create this group of decals using this water splash particle as the material and coloured it red. For these drops of blood on the ground, I loaded another decal particle system and replaced the material with the bleed out texture from Left 4 Dead 2. Next, I added the emit continuously property so the drops can spawn with duration and end fade set to 2, and lastly, animated it to spread along the ground. For the blood spilling from the neck stump, I used the Left 4 Dead 2 particle system named Gore Wound Brain Drops, and with patience, edited the properties in the particle editor such as trail length, lifetime, radius, and emission fade out. Then I added the blood incapitated particle system to show the pool of blood that forms under the sniper's corpse. Finally, I used more decal particle systems to show the blood leaking down the wall, although here I had to adjust the colour so as to accommodate for the lighting in this scene. Well, I suppose that about wraps it up. Hopefully this video has satisfied your curiosity into how I did all those fancy blood and gore effects for my SFM animation, and has surely given you insight into creating such visual effects. Thanks for watching, take care, and I will see you next time.